Hello and welcome everybody. My name is Bradley Pellegrin. I'm with the Veterans in Energy and I sit on the board of directors as an ERG officer. Today we're going to do a discussion here with Mr. Tom Cohenno. He's the co-founder of Applied Learning Science, former Navy veteran and retired from Southern California Edison. So a lot of experience there. But I think Tom could probably introduce himself better than myself. So Tom, why don't you let the people know in the audience space a little bit more about yourself?
Sure. Well, I'm a military brat as well as a Navy veteran. Grew up all over the world and ended up in Needles, California, a small pinprick of a town out in the desert. And graduated from high school and joined the Navy the next day, fastest way out of the desert. And I was discharged from the Navy and hired by Southern California Edison 30 minutes later. This is pre-cell phone. Walked to my apartment and unlocked the door, and I was hired. Spent 31 years there. And
when you talk about the rate of transition from veteran to utility worker, I think that's got to be a record somewhere.
I think so. It was a very interesting turn of events where I ended up putting in an application before I was actually discharged. And then time just went through over the months and I forgot about different things and just it was so coincidental. I think I probably put down my discharge date too, but I think it was more coincidental. And so I was hired right away. And that's close to my heart, actually, helping people make that transition these days.
Tell me a little bit about where that has led you and transitioned you. I know that you're doing a lot of work with character development, character-based mastery, and how the veteran kind of plays into that with some of their soft skill sets and their experiences. So can you tell me a little bit more about what it is Applied Learning Science is doing? And then we can talk about how you got interested in that.
Yeah, well, when I was hired by Edison, I went to work in a power plant, and I was there for about a year. And just before I was to transition to the city, this power plant was remote. I needed to come to LA. I wanted to go to college. I decided at age 25 that might be a good idea. But just after I left, there was a major steam leak at the plant, and my two carpools died. One of whom was a Marine veteran from Vietnam and ended up dying in the steam leak. And so 8 folks died, basically cooked to death. It was a very traumatic thing. I was still in Needles when it actually happened. And that kicked off an interest in safety for me and performance. And then I went to the bottom and climbed my way back up from utility man into system operations management. And then I ended up becoming the manager of substation training and then the manager of training for transmission and distribution, which was the operational arm of Southern California Edison. I did that for about 10 years. And we had a lot of injuries in the company, and including in the school that I managed. So I'm not immune from these activities as well, or from injuries or fatalities. And what I got interested in is how do they keep happening? What is our corporate response? And early on in my career, I was anticipating a Navy-like response to injuries and fatalities, but that never really happened. And the other part that interested me was, why would an employee do something that even they would say they wouldn't do? But they did. And I did the exact same thing. Little shortcuts, little things that we do. And so I just got really interested in what's the psychology behind that.
That's very interesting because I see the utility and the military as having a lot of similarities, but even your honesty here saying that I still take some shortcuts here, and I've seen some opportunities that people have taken that weren't the correct path. And as being a veteran and understanding the importance of the Army values, Army veteran, it can still happen to someone that has that stronger level of soft skills that have been beaten into them over and over, whether it be basic training or your advanced training or the time with your company or your team and even through deployments. What are some ways that you see that the utility is similar or different than the military in that way, as far as regarding who they employ and how they work together, and how a veteran could be a better resource, even though we still make those mistakes. I mean, how more common is that for someone to not have that background?
Well, it's interesting. I had this mindset when I went to work at Edison about how life was in an industrial environment. In my case, I worked in the engine room on 2 ships. And I remember one time on my first ship, the USS Kirk, we were going in a hurry in the Midway Battle Group. I was home ported in Yokosuka, Japan. And there were 7 or 8 ships, and we were going quickly to the Red Sea. It was during when Iran and Iraq were at war, which is before all these other more recent things, because I've been around for a while. And we were in a hurry, and somehow the Midway was rammed by a merchant vessel. And 3 people died. I believe these facts are correct. Somebody will remember this, I'm sure. And so for a while, there was this pause, and then the battle group kept going, and my ship was detailed to stop and stay with the merchant ship to make sure that it didn't sink. And we were there for about a day, and then a couple of days later, we were racing as fast as our ship would go, racing, and we started to get close to the Midway battle group. And then the captain came on the 1MC, which didn't happen very often. And the captain came on and said, "This is a captain speaking, an airplane just flew over. And on that airplane is the new CO, XO, and navigator of the USS Midway." And that was like 72 hours. So what that means is there was someone selected from the Navy to be the captain, the XO, and the navigator. They were detailed to some place with their gear. They were put on an airplane, and they were flown out to the middle of the Indian Ocean in like 3 days. I could be off on by some hours on this, but that's what happened. And I was like, that's accountability. If someone dies that's not supposed to die, there's accountability. And so when I was first at Edison, I kept thinking that people would be fired. Now, the parallel is not perfect because it takes a long time to prepare somebody for a senior position in a major utility, even in a vice president role. Of course, years and decades of preparation, and their turnover is not the same. Careers are 40 years and not 20. So there are a lot of variables that make that impractical to do. Plus, you don't get to learn from what happened. But that mindset made me think that our response was always sort of underweight. So that's one difference. And what I sort of observed over time was the consequences of misperformance drive the degree of sharpness culturally and steps that are taken. And that is a lot sharper in the military than it is in the utility, even though the utility is very similar. There's a large group of folks working as a large team trying to accomplish an important objective. So there's very much the same, but in some ways, given the length of careers and time and lower intensity, it's still different.
Thinking about what you just said, it drives a very strong culture of expectations to how your character needs to be and how it needs to perform. Do you see that same expectation of culture in the utility, and the consequences if you don't perform to that standard?
It's a great question, and the answer is no, right? And I think that there are several reasons for that, and partly that I mentioned the task of keeping the lights on in electric utility is a forever task, right? And the equivalent of battle is pretty much a storm. And most folks that I know actually appreciated storms. They heightened interest. Things went wrong, and I mean, it's not fun per se, but it was taxing. So the cultural requirements in a utility are lower. But I think that's the missing piece. And when we first started talking, I think that's the opportunity. So, and what really helped me tumble to this is a framework I came across called Bloom's taxonomy. And it's as old as 50, 60 years old. And it's just about how we learn. And it indicates that we learn in three different ways. We learn cognitively, Ohm's law, or how to shoot a weapon. And then we learn from a psychomotor perspective, how to climb a pole with fluency, or how to run through the jungle and defend yourself. But this third element is called affect. And I think that is the big difference between the military and utilities. For the military, they lead with affective learning, which is understanding the mission, your obligation to endure hardship, to not abandon your post, to not let down your peers, right? You're very much focused on the mission, not the money. So if you join the military and you enlist in the military, you often go through boot camp. And in boot camp, they pour into your mind. I mean, a cynic would say you're brainwashed. A veteran would say I'm being adequately prepared for the rigors of what I'm about to face, right? In some cases, I'm prepared for rigors I'm unlikely to face, but could. So you're being prepared for war, whether or not you actually ever see war. In the utility, it's very much focused on cognitively, what do you learn? And you learn Ohm's law, and you learn, grounding, and you learn these elements. And you prepare yourself physically, or you can't do the job. So that kind of comes with time. But it seems as if utility leaders, are reticent or uncomfortable talking about the affective component of what it looks like to be to gain true mastery of your work. Here's an example. If you are a professional lineman and you are cognitively, you're whippet smart, you understand all the technical details, you can climb as well as anyone, but you also have an attitude and a motivation to be as safe as possible. You're constantly looking at risk. You're unafraid to challenge those who would tell you to take risky behavior. And you can set the example. You will even defend a position, even if it's unpopular. And it turns out that as humans, our fear of being rejected by our peers or by others is just as strong as physical fear. When they measure the brain and you're fearful of being ostracized, or you're fearful of an alligator that's a foot away, the brain reacts the same way.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that just comes from evolution. Pretty much anytime where you had to stand and speak in front of your culture, your tribe, it could end up in you being ostracized, and that typically ended up in death. So there is a lot of similarity there. Absolutely. Continue on. I'm just fascinated.
No, that's great. And so it turns out that we don't realize what's happening, but boot camps and the academies are basically schools of character, right? And you get, in a certain way, in a certain construct, you get taught how to prepare yourself so that when you feel this emotional distress about an environment or a situation, you are trained to know how to respond. So I think a lot of, many of us have seen Saving Private Ryan, and the landing craft is headed for the beach, and you hear the rounds pinging off the front ramp. And what you don't see is the lieutenant going up to the group in the craft and saying, you know what, everyone's going to get a 25% pay raise after this. Just want you to know you get a 25% pay raise. Well, everyone in the landing craft's thinking, I just want to be alive at the end of the day. You can give me a 250% pay raise. I'm not doing this for the pay raise.
Doesn't matter at that point, right?
Doesn't matter, right? but they've been through training and have been enculturated so that when the ramp goes down, even though they're staring death in the face and instinctively, they should be going the other direction. What they should be doing is pointing the gun at the person driving the boat and saying, go back to England. That's what makes sense. But you override because you've learned how to manage these emotions that you get. Now, that's an extreme example in combat. And of course, soldiers by the thousands ran up the beach to their death, actually. And so you would think, well, that would be a relatively easy thing to prepare for going to work. When you're on a 4-person crew and one person's kind of driving the team along and they're saying, hey, let's do this. And you know it's not right, but you go along. And so this character development is preparing yourself for a situation where someone says, let's do this. Let's jump on the side of the truck and we'll ride it down the hill rather than get in the truck or walk. Just get on, just get on, just get on, someone says. And you've prepared yourself to know how to say, no thanks, I'm not going to do that, without breaking down on the inside. And it seems like such a small thing. But when we look at
undervalued is what it is. I wouldn't agree that it's a small thing. It's definitely undervalued though. And it's interesting now when I think back a long time ago to basic training and infantry school and ranger school and all these things. The thing they teach you first is the character development. You don't come in and then get a weapon and then go shoot a weapon. The thing that they teach you first in the first 3 to 4 weeks before you even go to BRM to do the basic rifle marksmanship is they teach you the character development and they teach you the general orders. And until you can show some display of being capable of doing those things, of staying up during fire guard and fire watch, of having a battle buddy and being there and supportive for him, they don't give you a weapon.
Yeah,
Right?
exactly.
So what good is the technical skill if you don't have like the emotional character development to execute it properly? And that's, you know, it's not a small thing. It's definitely undervalued though. And I think when we're talking about veterans, that's the difference that makes the difference. So what are some practices that you think can kind of drive the mitigation of risk there?
So I'm really glad because I think you have a perfect understanding. It seems like a small thing to so many people, right? And what I heard this phrase the other day, it's like a faint signal, right? You go through your day, you understand how to wire a transformer, you understand where to position the vehicle, you know all these things. But what you don't know and what supervisors and managers rarely address are the psychological aspects of preparing for the job, for those moments when things don't go appropriately. And so a lot of people don't talk about this aspect because they don't understand what to do. So from a practical perspective, you can actually define the attitudes that one should have. For example, if you're a safety professional out in the field or just we'll stick with the lineman example. And at first you're like, you understand the safety rules, but if you can get away with not doing them, you won't. And then the next step is you understand the safety rules and you're pretty diligent about doing them. And the next step is you understand it, you see somebody else not doing the safety rules, you'll actually say something. And that's where most people fall off, is right there. They won't say anything, right? And they'll go along to get along. It's less painful, so they will do it. But then the next level is you go into a new environment and you define what's critically important, what attitudes are important, what motivations are important, what do you have to look out for, what are the risks. And the top level on this Bloom's taxonomy would be that you're the living embodiment of safety as a lineman. You wouldn't get caught dead not following a safety rule. So it is so much a part of you. If you think about it, maybe the ultimate quick example is a Marine gunnery sergeant. You know, they're like all Marine all the time. Now, that could be problematic as well. But if there's any organization in the public consciousness that has a grip on affective learning, it's the Marines. Like my son, who was a Navy nuclear officer, said the Marines do the best pre-job hiring on the planet, because they tell you with these huge billboards all over the country that you're not going to like this. It's really hard. Only few people can do it. So they give you a realistic job preview before you show up, and you respond affectively. So the Marines start with affect, and they never stop with affect. And we say, well, that makes sense. That's a cynical person would say brainwashing. We would say preparation. And another example would be people driving ships or tanks or repairing Apache helicopters. Those are complicated jobs, but if you don't, less affectively oriented. But if you don't have the right mindset, attitude, and motivation, then you may not complete that maintenance all the way through in the way that you should. And so it's interesting, utilities, almost all of them have unions. And the union leadership seems to have a more innate understanding of this affective component. There's a loyalty often to the union and to the nation and to a variety of things. You see those aspects, and I think they actually have a better understanding.
That's what makes them strong.
I
That's
think
why
that
they can maneuver through bureaucracy and get the things that they want.
exactly. I think the opportunities, companies can learn from unions that these affective things matter. Whereas leadership is like, people should pick up these character-based traits, and there are ways to train character, there are ways to train wisdom, there are ways to reveal motivation and ways to do that, and that's what we do. We have ways to make this very practical. It's very context rich, so it's for a specific organization. What's important in their organization? What are the trends? Just like the Marines have a way of training, the Air Force does, and the Army, and NASA, and Southwest Airlines, and Nordstrom's, and others, with these very powerful cultures. And in my sense, it's like utilities forfeit many times this incredibly powerful, potent approach to order and prepare sort of the mental life of doing work in a hazardous environment. And the military does it easily.
Yeah, they're trying to design a physical or process risk mitigation as opposed to a psychological risk mitigation that should be nurtured from the beginning, right? As we talked about how the military does that first. How do you execute or even manage something like that with a company that's already have so many employees, and now you have to potentially bring them all back to educate them on why this is important and I like something that you said earlier. It was like a faint sound. That faint sound needs to be not so faint in a psychological standpoint, so you will execute on what is safe. And the stronger sound is doing it properly to make sure someone's okay. And the faint sound to be, I don't want to say this because I might embarrass myself because I'm speaking up socially, right? How do you empower that, or even manage empowering it? Or what's your path for training that, right?
Well, first, the first thing you do is just show people the framework. And then they understand. So when you go to a boot camp, you don't realize you're learning affectively. You're just trying to survive. You are being trained affectively in an extraordinary way. And then, as you mentioned, cognitively, you'll learn more and more stuff. When I first went to boot camp, I didn't learn anything about, marine engines, right, or boilers. I learned all about how to salute, march, and these customs and military courtesies and these things that you realize years later, they're extraordinarily important for how your behavior is governed, right? And doing your duty and following through, even if you don't feel like it, right? Character development trains the emotions. So if you show people this framework, then they can typically think of a person in their life. And we call this the alter ego. You think of a person who, I call this the middle column, this affective learning to the Marine's Marine, if you will. In fact, a great example of this is supposedly in the Marines, only the very best Marines become boot camp instructors, which is an extraordinarily wise thing to do because they set an example and a model for all the people in the company that they remember forever. You and I talked about this before. I remember my own boot camp instructors from 35 years ago, 40 years ago.
Sergeant Simpson.
Right.
And Tano. You said you'll never forget it.
MM1 Walker and ENC Storstad. I have no idea where they are, but I remember them.
No idea what they're up to, but I definitely remember, and their face.
So the first thing is the construct that you learn 3 ways. Second is to think of someone who really impresses you. And then you say, how can you replicate what they do? They're on top of the game from a safety perspective. They're physically in great shape. They understand the rules. They understand the theory about how to do this work. They set the example. They encourage others. They're fearless in the face of resistance. You have that example. And then what you can do is list what are the attributes of that person. And then we have some other assessments, values in action, character-based assessments, where you take the assessment and you can see what are your strengths and what are your weaknesses. And then you can map those assessment results against the character requirements for your line of work. So that would be slightly different if it's for, a Marine sergeant, right? Or a corpsman who's likely to be in a military hospital in the US because of the nature of their specialty. It's not a combat forward type work. So there's different aspects for each position or each role or each organization. In a utility, you would have to get very clear about what are the character requirements, one of which would be listening for faint signals, knowing what to trigger, how to respond, and supervisors and leaders being able to actually talk about these topics. So look at an example, look at assessments, understand how you can learn from the past. That's the wisdom part, and making sure that leaders understand this as well.
I have a thought. Oh, go ahead. I had a thought with that too. Just basically how you're talking about the example, right? Like the company has to have that person that's example across all those things, and also that person is being praised for doing those things that you might be afraid or shy to do. So to see that that constantly being increased and understood, I think has a lot of value. And where my thought is going with the audience that we're talking with at the Veterans in ERG, and they sit on employee resource groups for the veterans, and they're trying to identify how to mitigate some of these psychosocial risks and talking about the program and the character to develop, that would be the group to take this discussion to their higher, or take this program up the chain, whether they create it themselves or they just follow some guidelines even provided from this call, or reached out for some further information. That sets the example for the character training and develop, and it could bring some pretty significant visibility to the veteran ERG group as far as helping them expand, helping them gain a larger member base, and helping them to get funding and control their budget, which is something that's always difficult, right?
I think that's a wonderful idea, having been in a veterans ERG, is that there is generally in the public today, especially and in companies, an appreciation for those who have served in the military. And if you ask someone why that is, they can kind of tell you, well, they were sacrificed. But when veterans go to work, they often do extraordinarily well. And people, and they say, well, he was in the Army or she was in the Army, but they don't really know what that means. Right? They can't put their finger on what that is. And the right stuff, when we talk about astronauts, what's the right stuff? Right? That's the movie, the book, The Right Stuff. Veterans bring the right stuff. And the right stuff, the distinction is pretty much that affective component, which is the emotional preparation for difficult times and making the right choices by following your duty. Now, there's a distinction between heroism and leadership in combat, and they're completely different. It turns out that equal heroism is required in utility work to withstand the psychological pulls to not be as safe or as honest or as capable, actually chasing mastery, right? And it turns out another way to motivate employees in this space is to understand the construct, have them see a person who sets the example, and then provide high quality learning maps, if you will, that allow employees, once they're motivated by this distinction, they say, you know, I want to be that Marine Corps drill instructor. I want to be that. And then provide a high quality map for how to do that, to make these character and wisdom and motivational elements clear and easy to understand. And then people go, you know, I can do that. So we all need that path. When you go into the military, you get to swallow it, whether you want it or not. You're going to get the path. But in a utility where we don't enlist, right, we can't go to the brig, we have to do it. How do you turn a company of 20,000 people? Is by making these concepts visible, providing the tools, and generally people then will grab on. It's very compelling. We all want to be masterful at our work. We all want to be able to stand strong in a George Washington, Abraham Lincoln kind of way. You know, when the chips are down, we make movies about people who do these things, but we don't give people the tools or the path to achieve it on their own. We leave it to chance. And I think that's the opportunity.
So as we're digressing here, I appreciate you giving like basically the roadmap how you can start to do that. I think one of the other challenges is getting sponsor buy-in from the company, right? How do you, I think the best way to do that is to really present to them what a psychosocial risk is, how it impacts the safety of everyone that's involved in the company and what it actually does, and then trying to, you know, get it started as like an internal PMO project in their company. But what other advice or experiences have you had getting buy-in from this from someone that has ultimate decision-making power to say, yes, I will sponsor this. I believe in this. I want either the veteran ERG or group of ERGs or this specific person to bring this to the table because I see the value in it. There's obviously value. You know, how do you get the buy-in from that? And do you have some products that would be helpful to kind of help people go along that way?
So the way the sort of natural place for this to fit is in classic leadership development. Almost all companies, all utilities do leadership development. This adds an element and a nuance to that leadership development such that people learn in a way beyond classic management training. Here's communication, here's this, here's that, right? It does require that management be clear about what the organization's values are and virtues are, and recognize it's bringing those to life in a way similar to the military, that they get this uplift in human performance. So sidecarring that with a leadership development component, or having an ERG actually host a session for this. For one large client, that's exactly what we did. Is we designed the leadership development component, and then we actually put them through a character assessment, and they could start to see the connections and what we call the alter ego exercise, and they wanted to do more of that. So then we put hundreds of people through this very process. And then something else you mentioned, another vehicle, another way to do that is through classic safety and an awareness of psychosocial risk. And there's a mindset where we think, you know, if I'm injured, it's the company's fault. And my mindset shift has been, as a person who wore boots and Levi's, is, in the end, they're sort of like OSHA laws and company rules, but in the end, hey, there's my rules. And I need to be clear about what my rules are and how am I going to comport myself or conduct myself in a hazardous environment, because I want to go home. And people do die. They do die on the job, and they're severely injured in our companies. That's very real. And so there's an awareness, certainly that I'm sharing is, hey, friends and colleagues, prepare yourself physically, psychologically, and cognitively for what's coming. And so that's worth your time and effort to learn that.
Absolutely. And if you've learned that and you're prepared for that, then no matter the situation, nothing can take that from you. You become the person that's sought out for whenever there's trouble or need or risk or safety. Absolutely.
Right.
So, Tom, been a real pleasure discussing this with you, and all the evaluation that you took into creating something that can help build character development, not just for the veteran, it's for the entire utility company or any company really in general that encompasses a lot of what the veteran brings to the table. We've got some time for you to make some final closing comments, or just a way that we can get in touch with you.
Well, if you could just reach out. Let's see, the company's Applied Learning Science, and my we can make it available on the end of this video, perhaps just the email address. But other than that, my heart goes out to folks who are struggling to help others understand what is the veteran contribution, and to define that in a way so that's understandable. And my hope is that other people, after they appreciate that, it can spread, right? It's a phenomenon. It's this capacity and development that will help everyone. We can all have the right stuff, right? The whole utility can have the right stuff. So I think we can all learn from veterans who bring an awareness of what we're actually going through and how we get developed.
Excellent. Yep. Thanks, Tom. Happy to spread the word and spread the thought and analysis about how we can better keep our utility workers safe.
Great. Thank you, Brad.
Thank you, Tom. Just want to let the member base know, we'll get some contact information out for Tom if you want to discuss further. Also, you can go to the Veterans and Energy page, go to contact us, send a message attention to myself, Bradley Pellegrin. I'll be sure to get you in touch with anybody that we talk about or with and discuss with the Veterans and Energy. Thanks everyone for your time. Look forward to hearing from you all, hearing your questions, and Tom, following your future and seeing how it progresses the safety of the people that we care about.
Great. Thank you, Brad.